Greetings. For Lecture 1 for Theologies of Play, I'm going to provide some background on Christian perspectives on play, some biblical examples, and historical developments. I'm going to introduce why play is critical for pastoral ministry, and then talk about a little bit about the nature of and characteristics of play. And I will talk about the subject of how play has changed and evolved and some theological implications of that. We have some biblical narrative which suggest that Jesus celebrated and played, or went to a wedding anyway, and he told stories of banquets and feasts. Presumably, he enjoyed and appreciated life. Perhaps he laughed. In the fullness of incarnation, we understand Jesus to have experienced a full range of human emotions. A Christian, I believe, should be joyful, and this joy should express itself in play and celebration. And there's a lot of laughter and song and dance and feasting in the Bible to suggest that. The first question of the Westminster Catechism asks, what is the chief end of man? Obviously, this was before understanding inclusive language. What was the chief end of man? Well, the answer is to glorify God and enjoy God forever. To enjoy God forever. One of my favorite stories in the Bible is a story really about the interplay between God and humanity. It's a story that is kind of a foundational or a root metaphor for me, and it's the story of Jacob at Peniel in Genesis 32. I've posted an image on this on the content page for you. The phrase wrestling with God is common parlance among persons of the Judeo-Christian tradition. We may recognize our own experience in Jacob's struggle there by the ford at Jabbok. The story's setting is significant. Jacob is not on a spiritual retreat here. He has not been fasting and praying and following the rules. His encounter here with the stranger does not take place on Mount Horeb or even at Bethel, his own special holy place. Rather, he is in the midst of moving. Now, if you've ever moved, you know that it's not usually fun. The packing, the physical labor, and the goodbyes. But granted, Jacob is moving in accordance with God's direction. But we have no indication in the story that Jacob is looking to meet God on the way. He is in between. He is focused on the transition. He's preoccupied with concern for the well-being of his family and his possessions. Yet God interrupts Jacob's preoccupation with a manifestation of the divine presence that precipitates struggle and blessing. It's in the midst of Jacob's ordinary life that God meets him, in the very midst of his anxiety and preoccupation. Jacob does not come to God. God comes to Jacob. Jacob, however, does not recognize at first. It's a stranger. He simply engages in what seems to be a fight. Now, many see this as an argument that Jacob had with the stranger, an argument over animosity, an act of violence. But actually, I think it might be more playful. Jacob is surprised by an adversary as he engages in wrestling with an opponent. One could argue wrestling is a form of play. Now, I'm not talking about the World Federation of Wrestling here, but have you ever wrestled for fun? My brother and I used to wrestle. It was horseplay. Drove my mother crazy. She'd say, "Take that outdoors." God never says to Jacob, "Hey, this is God you're dealing with here." God leaves it to Jacob to figure it out. He could have named the experience as divine, mystical, demonic, or simply bizarre, but somewhere in the midst of his experience, Jacob realizes he is wrestling with God, and he's wise enough to demand a blessing. And somehow we are left with a sense that God might appreciate such audacity. The end result is, of course, that Jacob receives a new name. He is transformed by the game. The name characterizes his new relationship with God. That blessing, however, does not come cheap. It cost Jacob a serious wound, an injury that will, it seems, never heal. If you've played the game, you might get hurt, but in the midst of it, extract a blessing. Play is also part of and important to many religious traditions, in particular the Christian tradition. The Bible has lots of references to play. Consider the creation. God created the world as a kind of plaything and humanity as a playmate for the simple joy that it brings. One of the Vedas, the scripture of the Hindu faith, says that God was playing with the world in creation. The Sanskrit word is lila, for divine or holy play. The Christian faith depicts Adam and Eve playing in the garden, romping, enjoying each other's company. Traditional Judeo-Christian beliefs state that they were placed in the Garden of Eden to work it and take care of it. So work was play. It was an ideal work situation. But the tradition then seemed to historically convey that what was likely an ideal situation was disrupted when sin entered the world and humans were ejected from the garden. Genesis 3:19 described the human plight of hard labor from that time on. By the sweat of your brow you will eat your food until you return to the ground, since from it you were taken. For dust you are, and to dust you will return. The Hebrew belief system viewed work as a curse devised by God explicitly to punish the disobedience and ingratitude of Adam and Eve. The traditional thinking was that work came about as a punishment, banishment from the garden, for Adam and Eve's sin of eating from the tree of knowledge, for breaking the rules, for their hubris, their self-pride, in failing to accept the limits placed on them. And because we need to accept our punishment, the thinking goes, play came to be seen as inferior to work. For Augustine, play equaled sin. It was goofing off. And historically, there has been suspicion of play in the Christian tradition. Early Christians had to give up professional games and sports, even though some biblical scholarship has questioned this interpretation. Still, even today, we have a high sense of the value of work. Jesus is coming. Look busy. We have the Protestant work ethic. And in the theology of Luther and Calvin, work was not a curse from God so much, but God's will. Work was good, a duty, a matter of calling and vocation. But it still came to be interpreted as work was better than non-work. Idleness gave the devil opportunity to use you. So we have this legacy of devaluing of play. But the authors that we will read in the course will help us rethink that from a theological perspective, and we'll learn more about that. But what is play exactly? I resist putting a "it's this but not that" firm definition on it. Those are usually too broad or too narrow. In order to define play, many people cite the famed play theorist Johann Husager. His definition in Homo Ludens reads as follows. This is his definition of play: a free activity standing quite consciously outside ordinary life, as not serious, but at the same time absorbing the player intensely and utterly. There's been some scientific study and documentation of play in animals, in most species, in fact. Play is widely distributed among vertebrates, and it is believed that it confers some positive benefits. For many species, play is part of their mating ritual. Play helps social animals to bond with each other and enables them to sharpen their skills and learn about the environment around them. The same is true of humans. A human child and probably a human adult who has no time to play or lives in an environment that doesn't allow it is seriously endangered. Play is said to be a form of meta-communication, preceding language. It's primal, preconscious. Now here are some characteristics of play or understandings about the nature of play suggested by a variety of play theorists. One is that it is purposeless. It is done for its own sake. That it is a free and voluntary activity. That play provides freedom from time. It's transcendent. It can be described as a waste of time and money, even though I don't think so, of course. It takes one outside of time, and the boundaries of his or her world are redefined. Play can provide a diminished consciousness of the self and fosters a continuation desire. We want to keep it going. Some play theory says that play is a state of mind rather than an activity. That's an attitude. Well, there's several things that can be said. Play has a structure. If you've ever tried to play a game without the instructions or rules, you know that you can still play, but you have to make up the rules as you go along. Play may have objects or materials, a ball, a string, a doll, a joystick. Play has players, participants. It may even just be one person. But play has a time frame, a context, a setting, a ball field, a castle, a dollhouse. Play has boundaries and rules, as I said, a playing field. And to succeed is to stretch those boundaries, to hit the ball into the stands, taking it beyond the limits. Even if it's a solitary play, like jogging, play is always social. Even the most solitary pursuits, you still share in the wider human purpose. To play is to leap into the fray and to forget oneself where time stands still. Play may not be for a quantity of things to be achieved. Let's see how many marbles I can get. But it may be more for the quality of the experience, as claimed by Jerome Berriman, the founder of godly play, the pedagogical approach that's used in many churches. There are many games that have tangible goals, to win the most money, like Monopoly. And the idea of competition is such a dominant paradigm in our society that it's made it difficult to understand the value of play if it's not to win something or get something. Play is a form of ritual. It's an activity. It is also something that we do. And play has a history. Children, people have always played, but the ways that we play have changed over time. We have common threads that run throughout the history of play and across cultures, but play has evolved. I've seen it in my time. For example, these might be some ways that play have changed. Technology has certainly impacted play. And some critics say that the high-tech toys have diminished symbolic or pretend play. Play may be more indoor oriented. as Richard Louv, the author of The Last Child in the Woods, contends, and he talks about nature deficit disorder among children and adults as well. Play may be more planned and less spontaneous. We set up play dates for our children. Play may be more competitive, as I have suggested, more like work. We see the sports industry. It may be more violent. The Center for Communication and Social Policy says that upwards of 57% of TV programming between 6 a.m. and 11 p.m. has violent scenes, and longitudinal studies confirm that aggressive children have a greater appetite for violent TV and media. There's the branding of toys, which makes them expensive. A lot of times they're attached to a particular movie that's popular in popular culture. And the complexification of toys. You can't have a doll or a stuffed animal just to cuddle. It has to do something. It has to walk or talk or wet or ride a bicycle or talk. Or we expect more stimulation. Play and toys are more consumer oriented. You have to buy the next big thing, the next video console. It costs more to play. But change, I want to suggest, is not all bad. Consider how girls can now play in ways that they weren't able to in the past. At least they can play sports in schools in ways that they were not encouraged to do before. And play may be less gendered. It's more acceptable for boys to play house or for a girl to play ball. There is, I think, a nostalgia about play for the good old days, so to speak, when children could play without fear, and that may be exaggerated. The so-called good old days had their troubles too. We will talk more about what this evolution means and how it changes human perspective, how toys and play shape us into the people and society that we are, and then how do we minister in that context. When we use play as a way to speak theologically to describe God, it may seem blasphemous to some, or a trivialization of God's nature. My God doesn't play around, right? Well, C.S. Lewis contended that play might lie at the core of who we are and how we came to be, and how we understand God to be. We're created to play, and in play we are recreated. He used the image of the great dance as an analogy for the highest things. The idea of play and frivolity does not dilute the seriousness of humanity's devastating actions against ourselves, against nature and the Creator. But this might be held in tension or in contrast with the notion of co-creatorship, so that a theology of play as an aspect of creativity, of the imago Dei, can be explored. And we've suggested that play provides transcendence. It takes us up out of ourselves, out of time. And play is also eschatological. At least two occasions in the Gospels credit Jesus as comparing the kingdom of God with children and their games and play. The theologian Hugo Rahner, the brother of Karl Rahner, interpreted traditional religion as play, that viewed God as a player and the human as a player, and the church as a community of play, and salvation, both now and in the life to come, as play. There is, of course, and we don't want to forget this, play gone bad. Killing games, gladiators, etc. The ancient Mayan culture was known for their sadistic games. People can become addicted to gambling and video games. Joking can become bullying. Play can be underhanded, a deceptive activity. It's not always innocent. There are people who play games to get ahead, power games, and people get hurt. So play gone bad is a kind of ambiguity of play. It's also a theological issue for us to address. Religious faith then comes from playing with God, interacting and relating to God. Faith in this sense is about play. Now, some of you may think that play is not serious enough of a subject to have a course on. Hopefully, the fact that you're here means that you don't think that, or at least you're willing to give it a chance. And please disavow yourself of any notion that a course on play will be easy and fun. Well, fun maybe. There's a lot of reading for this course, and I hope that folks will come away with a life-changing, awe-filled appreciation for the meaning of play in faith. Aristotle said that play contains its own, even sacred, seriousness. I argue that play is critical and serious for at least 3 reasons. One is doing theology, living theologically, doing ministry is hard work. It is a struggle, but it is also a playful activity. God delights in us and God's creation. If it is not fun, if it does not bring joy to us, one of the goals is to get over ourselves. If we don't get over ourselves, if we don't lose ourselves in the playfulness of ministry, then we are going about it the wrong way. Secondly, if we're not having fun being Christian, we can't expect that anyone else would want to join us. And thirdly, there is a lot of sad in this world, lots of ugliness and suffering. God gave us the gifts of play and laughter as a counter to that. These don't make it go away or make it all better. It doesn't erase pain, but it brings healing in a hurting world. I want to end with a story today. When my daughter was in kindergarten, I was volunteering at her school, and I watched her class line up to walk out to the playground in one quiet, straight, single file line. But my daughter broke the line, and she climbed up on a retaining wall, and she walked, arms outstretched, balancing tenuously on the fence. And I thought to myself, well, I hope her teacher doesn't see her. But then I thought, how wonderful to feel so free. We spend much of our lives conforming, towing the line. But the author of one of our texts, Michael Koppel, says, to be a Christian is to be different, to be a misfit, a healthy misfit. We still find play difficult for the reasons that he names. But play in times of distress can purify our sensibility. It can make us open again to the gifts of God's goodness that surround us. So let's delve into our readings and discussion to unpack and practice the spirituality and ministry of play.